Well, hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm David Gersten. I'm the Director of Arts, Letters, and Numbers. And I want to welcome you all to this really wonderful conversation with Ren Weschler and Walter Murch. This program is part of a series of conversations titled Mr. Weschler's Cabinet of Wonders that Ren has curated for our Sonship exhibition in the 17th Venice Architecture Biennale. And I really want to thank Ren for all he's bringing to our exhibition. And I want to welcome and thank Walter Murch for joining us today. It is an honor to have you here. Walter Murch is a legendary sound and film editor behind such classics as the Godfather films, Apocalypse Now, The English Patient, and many, many more. And for decades, Walter has pursued many wide-ranging explorations. And he has been making many unexpected discoveries, some of which he will share with us today. Now, Ren Weschler has written a wonderful book about some of these explorations titled Waves Passing in the Night, Walter Murch in the Land of Astrophysicists. And Walter's book, In the Blink of an Eye, is just an incredible gift to all of us. And we're going to put links to these books in the chat now. And I'll also say, at the end of the conversation, we will have some time for questions from the audience. So if you do have questions, please write them in the chat, and I'm going to come back in at the end, and I will share them with Ren and Walter. And so now I will pass it to Ren Weschler to begin the program. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And we're both really happy to be with you. Indeed. So Walter and I have been bumping up against each other, our interests and so forth, for probably 2 decades at this point, if not more. It's always a delight to visit with Walter because you never, ever know what he's going to be completely enthralled by at the moment. All you know is that soon you will be too. As has been indicated, he is primarily known in the world as one of the great film and sound editors. Just to name a few films, the Godfather films, Apocalypse Now, The Talented Mr. Ripley, the English Patient, Julia, a whole slew of wonderful films. Just look him up. But beyond that, he is hugely admired as a writer about editing. The book that was mentioned in The Blink of an Eye it's kind of Zen in the art of editing. It seems to be about editing, but it's actually about everything else in the world. But the thing that's always fascinating me, as I say, is that he's always up to something else. There was a period when he was translating some of the great Italian journalist writer Curzio Malaparte's reportage into poetry, which was collected in The Bird That Swallowed Its Cage, absolutely beautifully rendered material. And as I say, a few years ago, his great passion was had to do with astrophysics, and we spent a lot of time talking about that, and that indeed ended up in this book, Waves Passing in the Night, which I wrote. But so you'll know that it was fun a few months ago when I said he is, by the way, currently writing a sequel to In the Blink of an Eye, a kind of memoir and kind of magnum opus on the subject of editing and everything else. And in the context of that, he had fallen into this thraldom of the golden ratio. And well, Walter, why don't you explain a little bit about that, and then we can just show the film about how you began to get fascinated by the golden ratio in faces and films.
Absolutely. I was the subject of a film by John Lefkowitz, a wonderful documentary, not being modest, and he intercut a lot of the interviews that I had done that are available on the internet with examples from films that I had worked on, but also films that I had nothing to do with from film history, which he felt also gave examples of what I was talking about. And so I had nothing to do with the film other than saying, go ahead. All of those interviews are freely available. And when I watched the completed film, something began to sneak into my consciousness as the result of those juxtapositions between films I knew very well and films I knew not at all, or just tangentially. And what began to emerge was the fact that the eyes of the actors were along a common line. And this was something that I was not aware of even when I was editing these films. So thank you, John Lefkowitz, for kind of prompting this discovery. So I put the film up on our 55-inch screen, and I grabbed a couple of feet of Aggie's wool yarn. She was knitting away, Aggie, my wife, and I lined it up with the eyes of the actors and then taped it in place and just sat back and watched it. And it was like what they call a strange attractor. The eyes were kind of magnetically attracted to this line. And then I thought, what is that line? What is it? So I took out Aggie's tape measure and figured out that this piece of wool was such a distance from the top of the frame and such a distance from the bottom of the frame, divided one into the other, and bingo, it was 1.618 if you divided the top into the bottom.
Should we show them the movie first?
This was the golden ratio.
Should we show them the
And
movie?
I immediately, raised my hackles of interest. And I started putting together the film that you're going to see in a few minutes of examples of this. And I didn't search out these examples, by the way. They just tumbled out because it is such a common thing that when cinematographers photograph a close-up, and Ren and I are now in what's called medium close-up. This is a close-up. If I went in further, it would be an extreme close-up, but if a shot that, yes, there we go, a shot that cuts somebody at the breastbone is by convention called a medium close-up. When actors are in that relationship with the camera, it's almost like a magnetic force that makes cinematographers put the eyes at this, my eyes are at this level right now as we speak. So I think the best thing to do now is just to cut to the chase and look at this film. It's 14 minutes long, so be patient with it. It's got some very interesting things in it. And it also begins to answer the question of why is this? And it's all about the architecture, since we're dealing with Venice Biennale architecture, with the architecture of the frame and also the architecture of the human face and how those two things interact, or at the choice of the filmmakers, don't interact. This is not some iron law that has to be observed, but it is observed in the breach, so to speak. Almost everyone does it. And as Ren and I will be talking later, they do it because they're unconscious of doing it. And there's lots to say about that, but I think the best thing now to do would be just to look at the film.
Okay, here we go. So a few quick comments. I'm told by my friend here that if it's coming over Wi-Fi, there's a little jerkiness to the film and a little sound distortion. Having said that, we are posting in the chat the Vimeo where you can go back and watch it, and you'll hear it much more beautifully. It's a gorgeous piece of editing. In a second, I want to show another little short sequence, but first I wanted to ask you a few questions about what we just saw, Walter. In a second, we'll be talking about where this is coming from. Is this cinematographers or editors? And in the question of editors, especially in the images that we saw from your films, are there cases where you blow up the frame so that it looks more natural and that's why the eyes are there? Or is that always the frame that you use, the one that the cinematographer shot?
It's a 21st century question. Back in the 20th century, the previous century, editors almost never screwed around with the framing. Now it comes with the territory of editing a film. Many people, David Fincher, for example, will shoot overscans at 8K, and it's up to the editor and David Fincher, obviously, to then selectively reframe within that huge image. And that was actually one of the things that prompted this whole line of investigation. Now it's been going on for a year almost, because I was writing a chapter of this new book talking about the fact that editors now are being asked to be cinematographers. So if you are, how should you frame things? Because we now have that ability with the snap of a finger. But previously, it was just determined by the cinematographer. This is, the 10 Commandments etched in stone or in celluloid, and we would never think of screwing around with it. But that has now all changed. But it's looking at that film. There's lots to say about it, but the zone, I guess, is sort of where I'm framed right now. If I put my head up to here, that's one head, and then there's another head. So it's my head is maybe 1/5 of the whatever it is. I can fit 2.5 of my heads in the frame. That and closer is where the magnetic force of this line begins to really exert itself.
I was going to show, by the way.
And I should say, we'll get into this later, but it does so unconsciously, because I've talked to Vittorio Storaro, who shot
Hold off on
Apocalypse
that.
Now, and John Seal, who shot Talented Mr. Ripley and Cold Mountain, English Patient, and Caleb Deschanel, who's a friend from way back, and Peter Rosenfeld, who's a camera operator. And they say they never think about the golden ratio. Some of them had only a glancing interest or even knowledge of the golden ratio. And the great line from John Seal is, I just try to make the face feel comfortable in the frame. Mm-hmm. And that is sort of an entry into the explanation of why is it that it has this effect. But once you widen the shot out to, way back, then other elements of composition come into play, and then the golden ratio is not so magnetically attractive. It still has an effect. You might have seen a shot from Godfather 2 where Vito is delivering groceries, and it's a wide shot. You see the whole figure of Vito, but his eyes are right on the line. And that, in a scene that has lots of chaotic stuff going on, to put the focus of interest on the line is a way of telling the audience, you should be looking here. So it still exerts its influence even in medium shots, long shots, wide shots, but it's much less aggressive. It's kind of like the nuclear force that, once you get into a certain area, it just becomes irresistible. And we can talk about resisting it, and some filmmakers do. But that's a whole other story.
Walter?
The other thing to mention is the camera operators playing with, perhaps with the with the director's. Ren, are you with me or what?
Yeah, no, I wanted, I realized that I was trying to say something, and the way Zoom works is that if you're talking, you can't hear me talking. But I was going to say just that a few things, because I want to keep going. But there were two things that we agreed we want to look at directly after showing it, and just let me just go to that and get your comments on that. Wait
a minute. Oh.
Here it comes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
You noted that this happens. This is not just cinematographers, and this is just people doing Zoom meetings. And you mentioned that.
Right.
Talk about this. What was this?
Well, that's again, this is the 21st century, and we have all become cinematographers because of Zoom and FaceTime and everything. And these are random frame grabs that I took. These are not pre-cooked things. This is a conference with 9 screens, and then that interview was me being interviewed on CNN with Christiane Amanpour, and she's framed on the line. And it was interesting when we were setting this up. I was being talked to by the tech people at CNN, and they said, adjust your framing. And so I was, tipping the screen like this. And when I hit the golden ratio, they said, okay, that's perfect. But there was no golden ratio. In other words, they also have this thing built in to how they do it. And we all do too. I mean, we've all been on Zoom conferences where people are down like this. And it's weird. Or, like this. And this is another metaphor for what's going on is the hat brim metaphor. I don't wear a hat very often, and back in the past, everyone wore hats. And when they would put the hat on, they would spend a few seconds getting it at the right place. So it framed the ensemble of the look. And when you get it right, what happens is the hat becomes part of the whole presentation. If you want to, you can tip the hat back, put the hat way back here, but that's now expressing an attitude. As soon as somebody sees you, they know what you are feeling. You're feeling cocky, and you can take on the world, and you're happy. Maybe you're slightly aggressive. On the other hand, if you jam the hat down here, then they know what you're feeling now. I don't want to talk to you. I'm angry. I'm upset. I'm depressed, and those kind of things. Yeah.
That in turn makes me think of this other thing I want to share with you. Let's see here, which is in the film, you'll remember. So is that right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So in the film, you said, note this framing. And that
right.
Your comment about the hats makes me think that is similar to what's happening here. There's something being conveyed when it's not eye to eye in this way.
Yeah, I wish Hitchcock were part of this discussion because it would be great to know what's going on here. Connery is on the line. Tippi Hedren is noticeably not on the line. And I know something about the story, and she's a kind of a double dealer, and he's out to, so on the face of it, one of the things that is happening here is she is being made to appear weak relative to him. And that's another one of the things where you can play with this hat brim idea, is that if the eyes are below the line, the person appears weak relative
what would have
to
happened
the
if it was
framing
like
of
this?
Sean Connery in this case. On the other hand, he could have framed it this way, in which case she would be kind of eye to eye, let's say, with Sean Connery. The other slightly disappointing explanation for this is simply that they wanted to get her great beehive hairdo in frame and not cut it off as we did in that previous thing. So there's that scene from Unbearable Lightness of Being, where Juliette Binoche is being interviewed by a Russian. His eyes are above the line and hers eyes are on the line, although she's slightly tilted. But that's, he's looming over her. He's more powerful than her in that scene. Whether that was done consciously or not, I mean, I edited that scene and I never thought about it consciously. I certainly picked up the idea that this guy was, going to browbeat her and threaten torture. Anyway, that's
you often say that a great deal of editing is feeling, and that you, given a series of different possible takes, feel something as you're editing, and you are channeling that in your editing. So that, in a way, is one of the things that you're feeling, is the barometer of where the eye is and who's in power. Why don't we look at that? The thing that we said we would look at is a little 3-minute film that goes a little bit more into depth in the question about how it's not just the eyes that show up on the face, but things are even more complex than that. And then we'll come back on the other side of that. So,
let me just wait a minute. Let me just say a couple of things before going there.
Okay.
Can you put me? Yeah.
There you are.
It's you can think of what you'll see here are zones of the face in different colors and their relationship. And so there's the forehead zone, there's the middle zone, and then there's the lower zone. And once you get into this, and I use the delightful Ingrid Bergman as my avatar here, she's just a wonderful face to look at. But what you'll see at the end of it is what I call the zoetrope wheel of all these different human faces from history and from different regions of the world, all lining up in terms of the architecture of the face. So, okay, let's run it.
Boy. So
we cut too soon there, but the music is from a composition called Oasis by Paul Sultanay.
oh, sorry.
So,
And the point at the Venice Architectural Biennale is I am Pei, Mies van der Rohe, Walter Gropius, eat your heart out. I mean, the architecture of the human face is absolutely amazing. Now, to what extent, again, you were unaware of this until you fell into this,
I knew about the golden ratio, that was it. But I, despite having edited all of those films, you know, in this business for 50 years, I never looked at my editing screen and said, wait a minute, that's the golden ratio. So this all kind of began to bubble to the surface just about a year ago.
I should mention, everybody, that I think the chapter in your ongoing work that you're doing right now, in which this comes up, is something like 25, chapter 25 or 29 or something. And every single one of these chapters is filled with things like this. So hurry up and finish this book. It's going to be great to be able to look at it.
Tell me about
But anyway, I want to now go back a little bit more slow motion and get the response that cinematographers, you raised it a little bit before, but I would have just thought that this is something that was taught. Oh, well, the reason this is happening, there's actually two protests that you could have. One is, well, Walter is cherry picking, you know, and there are indeed, in fact, I could get to it. There are faces that don't follow this, but in fact, most faces do. And there are films that don't necessarily follow the comfortable line or whatever we want to call it, but most do, it looks like. But then the thought is that this must be something that was being taught, and that's why it happened. I would have thought it was being taught at USC, and when you went to editing school, and Carol Ballard was in cinematography and so forth. But they all say no.
They all say no, and that was my experience going to film school, is that there was not a whisper of the golden ratio. I mean, we even had film design classes, graphic design, but and you know, it may have been whispered about as a concept, but the idea of putting the eyes on the line was never mentioned. And that was my experience. I of the 5 cinematographers that I talked to, not one of them said, "Oh yeah, golden ratio, smatio." Nothing. They just they all said some version of what John Seale said, which is, we just try to make the face comfortable within the frame. And to say a few words about that is that you can think of it in musical terms, in that from the hairline to the chin, the eyes are at the golden ratio, and there is a rhyme by placing the eyes on the golden ratio within the frame. There is kind of a harmonic resonance between the face and the frame, and that was that line in the 14-minute movie where I said you can think of the frame itself as a face looking back at the audience. So there's some kind of visual equivalent of musical harmonies going on here.
One of the, I forget, I think it was one of the cinematographers said to you that, made the experiment, he said, "I'm looking out my window right now. The first thing I look at is at the golden mean of the window, and then I get taken to whatever it is I want to look out of the window at." I forget who said that.
That's when I talked about that shot in Godfather 2, that it's a big wide shot of Vito delivering groceries, and his eyes are, his head is about this big, but his eyes are on the golden ratio, because the hypothesis is, just as Peter, the cameraman, said, we tend to zero in on that as that's where I look first, and then I'll look somewhere else. This is all kind of new information, really. So it's up to all of us to explore further, I guess.
We at the Venice Biennale like to be on the cutting edge.
There we are.
Of new
It's
information.
sharp. It's sharp out here.
Having said that, oh, by the way, I want to first talk about that insight you have about this whole screen facing us. It's one of the most fascinating senses of the dreamlike world that we are when we enter a theater and we're in the dark, and we are being faced by the world and the world of the screen, and that word faced, our gaze coming from our golden face is looking at an entire face, and we are face to face, among other things, with another creative person's idea of the world, but it's the entire screen that is the face looking at us. There is no place that does not see you, in the lines of Rilke, in that thing.
There's a concept in psychology called the visual dominance ratio. If you put two people of unequal power together and get them to interview each other, what they do is they clock the time that the more powerful person stares at the other person as they're talking to them, and how much the person being talked to looks back. And if it's a 1-to-1 ratio, pretty equal, then they're sort of equal. If it's not, then you can calculate, you can actually give a number to what is the power slope here. And this is the seductive thing about film, is that we get to be really close to powerful, beautiful, interesting, perverse people and watch them, and we don't take our eyes away from them. We just look at them, and they don't know we're looking at them, because the third wall is not, they don't look at the camera. And this is very seductive. It's like I'm so close to absolute power, or whatever it is, and that's all the invention of the close-up. Early films didn't have close-ups, and by the time close-ups began to emerge in the 1910s, the real seductive power of film began to have its Svengali-like influence on us.
It occurs to me, it's one of the things that's so weird about Zoom, is that we are both, neither of us is looking at the other, although we're both looking at the other. The fiction of Zoom is that we're both looking out. It's very confusing. That's part of what's confusing about this situation. You and I are not face to face. We are both facing the people who are looking at this. But anyway.
Well, here just one thing about that is, think of the odd thing about a news reader. When they read the news, they are looking at you, and they have teleprompts and everything, but the idea is eye contact. A terrible thing happened in Germany today. There was a terrible flood and 150 people died. If the newsreader starts looking off, everyone gets really jumpy. The television audience will say, "What's going on? Something's happening that I don't know about." And that's why their newsreaders are trained to just direct at the camera, at the audience.
And I have a feeling there was a moment when I was looking over at my friend John over here, and I had a sense that I wasn't listening to you anymore.
Right. I said, "What's up?" I mean, that's exactly it. In person, if we were talking in person, the amount of eye contact, this whole visual dominance, is actually quite low. We talk and we say, that gives me another idea. I think I was reading a book the other day, and do you remember that thing? So if you clocked the seconds out of a minute that we actually made eye contact, it would be quite low, whereas a newsreader is 100%.
And we get freaked out when somebody stares at us while we're having a conversation with them.
Yeah.
They're playing that dominance game.
Yeah, us and cats. If you want to freak a cat out, look at it and keep staring at a cat.
Who says you don't learn things here? I do want to shift over a little bit, and this is a question I've asked you many times. I think you've nailed the question of why the eyes are on the screen. You've nailed all those issues. But I want to come back to talking about golden ratio more generally. And what is the deal with that golden ratio in the face? I mean, how did that happen? Why would that have happened?
Well, that's a mystery, because it's not intuitive when you read the literature on the golden ratio. It's pervasive in nature. Principally, the golden ratio is a way of solving the packing problem. How many seeds can you get in the disk of a sunflower? What's the most seeds you can get? And it turns out to be the golden ratio. How can you make most efficient use of leaves axially around a branch so that they don't shade each other? Golden ratio. DNA, the spiral of the DNA, the width of the DNA versus a single, the distance from one base pair to the next is the golden ratio. So it's, but the face is not seeds in a seed pod.
Right.
It's something else. And that's, there is an aesthetic component to the golden ratio. It's called the divine ratio by Renaissance painters because they loved it so much. So there's something else going on there that is deeply encoded in our neuronal structure. Maybe if we get deep enough into neurons, we'll find, oh, there's the golden ratio again. Well, in terms of the resonance of the neurons or something. I don't know.
There's something I want to go back to. Are we sharing? Am I sharing it? Okay. Okay. I want to show you. I thought a very interesting idea that you had.
Yeah.
You write about it some here and some other places too. But the notion of the one of the things you talk about is nursing. But beyond that, just the notion. One of the things you say about nursing is that it is a word that applies both to the mother and the child. The child is nursing and the mother is nursing. In other words, it's one activity that they're both completely tied up with. It's also the case that it's not just providing nourishment, it is also the staring at each other that is taking place.
Yeah.
The gaze, the fixed on each other. And if you want to talk about a ratio getting imprinted, that would be the time. I mean, it's interesting, by the way, I wrote a piece when my daughter was born, 30 seconds after the birth, while they were helping my wife, I was holding my daughter and her eyes were locked on my eyes at that moment. I have a rather large nose. They weren't locked on my nose. They weren't locked on my hair, which was rather large in those days. It was the eyes they locked on immediately.
Yeah.
And then, but it seems to me that something, and we have a painting by our friend Jerry Davis of breastfeeding, and what's happening there, I think, is it doesn't explain why the golden ratio appears on the face. And by the way, it doesn't so much appear on the face in an infant who's just been through, birth. It will stretch out and so forth.
Yeah, it's about
oddly in this image, if you go from ear to the bottom of her head, her eye is at the golden ratio. But I also love the way that part of this image is playing off of Michelangelo, God creating man with her finger there. But that activity, and I love also just the steam coming off of the focus. Seems to be very, very much of what's involved, at least in the sense of looking at why we look at a screen the way we do, why we look at, it is being absolutely imprinted, in this case, from the hairline of the mother to her chin. It's being stared at. I think that's surely part of it.
It's this thing that Nico Tinbergen called supernormal stimulus, and he studied it in seagulls. That the baby seagulls just out of the egg have their focus is the red dot on the seagull's beak, and that's the sign. That's the signal for nursing, basically for food, and they will see the red dot and they'll peck at it, and then mother opens up and regurgitates yesterday's halibut or something. I think it's a strategy of evolution that when we emerge out of the womb, we need a handrail. So we're given, in the case of seagulls, we're given the red dot. And in the case of human beings, it's eye contact. We're programmed, it's just, it's firmware or something. We're programmed to lock onto the eyes, and that's what we do. And perforce, when we lock onto the eyes, we also see the eyes in relationship to the face. It doesn't matter whether the hair is big afro hair or no hair at all. We're locked in that ratio, and it begins to do its work. I mean, that's another whole question, which is this habit forming, that we respond to this because of the ratio, and over hundreds of thousands of years, that's just, it's grooved into our neurons, or is it deeper still? And our preference for the golden ratio is somehow sprung from the same root as the fact that the human face is a golden ratio.
Yeah, it's interesting. It may well be, as you say it, that all the other golden ratios, certainly in culture, might be coming out of that imprinting, the red dot. By the way, it occurs to me that maybe Hitchcock should have put red dots on the cameras when he was making the birds.
Absolutely.
But it occurs to me that this is not the first time I've been down the golden ratio. It's surprising to me that you didn't have this thought about golden ratio sooner, because you've been thinking about golden ratio in all sorts of other ways. And I think we're kind of coming to the end of our hour, but I wanted to just show one other thing that you've done. One of your other passions are the pyramids. And this is a lovely little thing about phi, that 1.618, as it applies to the pyramids. Let's everybody watch.
Okay, so here's a triangle which has this ratio of 1/2 to 1, and we want to know the length of the hypotenuse, and we use the Pythagorean theorem, and we have to find now the square root of 1.25. But if we take the hypotenuse and rotate it up, we create another rectangle. Now we want to know the length of the long side of that rectangle. We add the two numbers together and we get phi, 1.618034, which is phi. Now, there it is, 1 to phi. Now, rotate that line and create another triangle. This is called the Kepler triangle, because the three sides are 1, phi, and the square root of phi, thanks to the Pythagorean theorem. That's the angle that's created as a result. If we duplicate it, we get a pyramid, and this is exactly within with 1/20th of 1% accurate to the Great Pyramid in Egypt.
Go figure. It occurs to me, Walter, that this is only the tip of the Walter iceberg when it comes to pyramids. Maybe we might want to do another one of these just on that subject, but we can talk about that later on.
Yeah.
Stay tuned, folks.
This is the architecture forum, after all.
Right. So maybe we'll have to come back in a few weeks and do that. But,
right.
But I guess we're suggesting that perhaps we can leave it to, we can credit Egyptian mothers with the shape of the pyramid.
Actually, the funny thing is, I studied Egyptian sculpture for phi, and they put the hairline way down, or they have bands, or they don't have the Greek did this, and the Sumerians did this, but the Egyptians did this.
But not
there's
the
something to
mothers.
be studied there.
Not the
Not
mothers.
the mothers.
The mothers taught
Yeah,
taught the kids the golden ratio who would grow up
That's
and
true.
find the pyramids. There you go.
yeah. No, I'm talking about the artists, not the mothers.
Anyway, it occurs to me that I've been noticing that there's been a lot of.
It was the emergence of male-dominated societies.
Yep, there you go. And yet the architects had it in them, even though they were dominating. I was thinking, it looks, I'm just saying, there's 42 things that have appeared on chat so far. If people have questions, maybe they can put
Right.
in the chat, and maybe David can join us again and talk to us a little bit about what kinds of comments have been coming in.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much. Fantastic. And yeah, there's a whole flurry of activity in the chat, a great debate and discussion going on. And I'm going to try to pull a few questions from there, but I want to start with a question that I got to when you made the jump to the pyramids. Because, Walter, you've spent an enormous amount of time looking very closely at astrophysics, as we know, and in particular, the Titus Bode theory in our solar system.
Yeah.
And so when you were speaking now, you did refer to the line as a kind of magnetic attractor. I think at some point you also said about a harmonic resonance in relation to it. So
Right.
in relation to the golden ratio in film. And I'm wondering if you have sensed any connection between this particular harmonic resonance and some of the work you've done relative to our solar system and relative to Titus Bode.
That was my first intuition when I started studying the spacing of the planets via Bode's law, but it isn't that, and it resolutely is not that. And it's significant that the golden ratio does not enter at all into music. A note in a golden ratio to the vibration of another note is not a pleasing ratio. So there are limits to everything, and we've discovered the limits to that.
By the way, one thing that I found interesting was that if you take a stalk of a plant and you look at how the golden ratio has moved, the angle turns out to be 151 degrees between each sprouted leaf. And that sets up a situation where you're not going to have shading of any leaf. And by the way, that's why pine cones are also like that, and why artichokes are like that.
Yeah.
But the number
correct. I think it's 137 degrees.
I'm sorry, you're right. It's 137 degrees. That's right. But then if you add 137 to the 51 degrees of I was suddenly thinking, oh my God, look at that. The 51 degrees of the pyramid and 137 degrees, that's gotta be, it turns out not to be, but I thought it was gonna be 180 degrees, but it's not far from 180 degrees. So that's weird.
It's not far, but it's not close enough.
No banana. Anyway.
I just want to share that, Michael Harrison, great composer, is here. And in fact, in the chat, did also point out that the golden ratio is very dissonant and generally not used in music, but whole number proportions.
Not at all.
He's saying are the foundation of harmony, and I have a feeling that the whole number proportion.
That's the Bode's law is whole number proportion, so it's more musical than this.
Yeah.
So what other questions do we have?
So Rivalera was wondering what you thought about the relationship of this question to hand motions. And she specifically was pointing out that that when you're speaking now, for us to engage your hand motions, it takes actually quite exaggerated hand motions. And I think she's wondering, how do you see the hands in relation to the line of the eyes in the framing?
I don't say no. I haven't looked at it, but it's significant that the language center of the brain is very close to motion senses. So it's like if language is loud, it sort of spills over into the hand motion. You have to use your hands.
That'll be a whole other chapter hands in film is going to come up. I have a feeling that by the end of this. I should mention, by the
Yeah,
way, Lee Belair, who asked that question, is going to be with me on Monday. And I urge people who are here today, we're going to be having a fascinating conversation on, among other things, the architecture of disability culture. But she's a remarkable artist, and so we'll be doing that on Monday. Check back and see about that. Other questions?
Yep.
I have it written here. I can't see who said this, but somebody was asking about retinal construction of the visual field and what cells light up where, which I think that might be a neurological traffic question.
It's off my beam. I can't answer that.
Yeah.
We'll try to find somebody else for that in one of our future conversations.
Let me see. Well, please send questions now. I'm trying to follow the chat. There's a lot of conversation. Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of gleaning from the conversation. I would like this point of the frame as the
frame as a face
looking at us, right? I mean, this is sort of the face-to-face. I think at some point you said there's this face-to-face encounter, which, you know, a lot of, you know, philosophers, Manuel Levinas included, have made this incredible point about the face-to-face encounter between two humans. Incredible space in, you know, in life itself, right? In on Earth, mystery, incredible mystery. And I wonder if you could say a little more about that, how you see that conversation in film, and maybe even, you know, you mentioned 20th century, 21st century. If you think the face-to-face encounter between viewers and film has transformed over this 100 years.
You know, there are films in that film that I put together. There are films from the 1920s, you know, Joan of Arc, bang, you know, it's right on the line. Peter Lorre's, that's actually a very unusual thing, because Peter, in that he's about to zero in on a poor innocent child. He's kind of getting his mojo going, and he's in a medium shot or even a medium wide shot, and yet when he lowers his head to say, okay, here I go, his eyes are right on the line, even though his head in the frame is about this big. So that ratio, 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5-to-1 ratio, and that's very unusual. But I can't say, other than what I was saying before about this visual dominance ratio, that the seductive power of film is the fact that we can get really close to people and watch them think. That's one of the real powers of film, is the first art that can choreograph silent human thought through facial gestures. I mean, look at what Al Pacino was doing in the moments before he stood up and killed Sollozzo. You know, you can see those thoughts clashing with each other. Should I do it? Should I not do it? How can I do it? When should I do it? Da, 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 da. And that's the seductive nature of that, is that we can do this without being noticed. They don't know we're watching. And so we're ghosts we're ghosts in the machine, in a sense. We're ghosts at the party. And that's a childhood wish. If only I could be invisible and just wander around and watch people. Well, that's what happens when you watch a movie.
It occurs to me two things that I would add. One is something I was beginning to get at, which is when you're face to face with the screen in a theater, you are in a room with 150 other people who are face to face. So on the one hand, but you're experiencing it in your own dream, in your own monad.
Right.
And yet there are 150 people around who are also having that experience with what at the end of the day is a blank screen with puddles of light being projected onto it. So it's quite complicated. But one way to think about this, Walter, might be the Gesamtwerk, whatever the word is,
Yeah.
before film, and which is going to lead directly to film in a way, is Wagner.
Right.
Bayreuth, for example. So you have music, you have scenery, you have all the artists collaborating and so forth. But
you don't have close-ups.
You don't have close-ups. That's the point. And so in answer to David's question, I would guess that there is that the phenomenology of going to see opera, for example, which was the closest to film or was going to lead to film, was entirely different.
Yeah.
And I would guess if you go back to Shakespeare without the music involvement, or there's a little bit of music and so forth, or go back to Aristophanes, to Aeschylus and so forth, it's entirely different.
Yep.
The big thing about film at a certain point is suddenly the face. And
Yeah.
Anyway.
Suddenly the face. It's quite beautiful.
That concept that Ren was just talking about is what I refer to in the book and other things that I've written as mass intimacy, because film is a mass medium. It has to speak to all 600 people, being generous, in the audience, and yet it has to speak to each individual person as if it was a private communication with them. And the person has to feel, how does this film know I feel that way? I feel that Michael Corleone is looking at me. He's reading my thoughts. How is that possible? Well, it's a wonderful alchemy of mainly about knowing what to leave out. And if you leave out enough and the right things, the audience projects their inner wishes onto the screen as if they were coming from the screen. And so in a sense, the circuit is completed. That screen is the face, but it has a good percentage of the very face that is looking at it. You know, it's a mirror kind of a thing.
It's interesting in Kabbalah, the notion, the Kabbalists, the Jewish mystics of the 13th, 14th century were wondering how the hell God could have created anything because he was already everywhere.
Right.
And their answer was that, you know, before the creation,
God is limited by his omnipotence.
But then the answer for them was that at the moment just before creation, he breathed in this notion to make room for creation. He absented himself. And then he sent the light in, and by the way, sent a projection of light in. So he was a filmmaker too, I guess. But and then something goes wrong and so forth. And that is why we feel so far from God, because to make creation, he had to withdraw. But a question I have for you, Walter, Diderot has the great comment that the artist is merely the first viewer of the completed work of art. After him, there'll be many more. As you are editing, you had a very, very beautiful description a second ago of feeling Corleone, Michael's anguish and so forth and so on. You're the first person, you are both constructing it and feeling it. Is there a moment where you go from being a technician to being blown away by, oh my God, this is what he must be thinking, or is it the other way around? How does editing work in that regard?
Well, it's, editing is not a technical art. I mean, it's as technical as painting is technical. I mean, you have to know how to mix the paints, and you have to know the effect of putting red next to green and all of that kind of stuff. But editing is, editing is not a good word for what we do. The French languages have a much better word, and Russian, which is montage, which is to build, to put together something. And if you hire a plumber to come and install some pipes in an addition to your house, they will montage the pipes. And that's mainly what we do. And then, of course, there is editing. Once we put it together, then we figure out how to make it not so long and make it more emotional in the right places and everything. So it's
but is there a moment...
you are responding to that feeling. The hazard is that you see a shot I don't know, 10,000 times. And so there's a certain, you have to avoid a crust forming over a shot just through over familiarity.
But is there a moment where, I'm just taking it as an example, the Michael scene, but you can think of another one where suddenly you get a gulp in your throat, where you really see it clear for the first time, you go, oh my God.
Yeah, I can't, it happens, it has to happen. Otherwise the film won't have any, it won't get up off the ground, More questions?
Yeah, somebody just asked a question for Walter. Does he miss the old way of editing Steenbecks, or does he prefer the Avid digital editing?
I'm glad that I had the experience of editing in Stone Age material, but I'm glad it's gone. But the technique, some of the techniques that I used to deal with those stones are valuable to me, even though I'm working. I mean, I've been working digitally for half my career, at least. So it's, but I'm glad I went through the gauntlet of dealing with physical film.
Would it be valuable for?
I don't miss it. No.
Would it be valuable for film students today to do some analog editing? Do you think?
No, that would be like teaching people to drive by, okay, learn how to drive the Model T. Then you can move up to the Edsel. And then maybe we'll let you drive a Mustang.
Well, it's interesting. There's a comment and a question. One was relative to the close-up, and when the point that you made about the intimacy, that there was no close-up in the opera, and somebody pointed out that relative to audio, meaning that the audio recording allowed us to hear the whisper, which was, of course, also not possible in the opera.
Yeah, and film also allows you to play with silence, which is impossible to do for any length of time in theater or opera. I mean, you can do it for brief moments, a little Luftpause, to have 30 seconds, maybe, I don't know, Krapp's Last Tape, maybe Beckett, some people can do it. But in general, when you go to live theater, silence is not on the agenda.
Yeah, that's pretty fascinating relative to the point about looking eye to eye. That in live experience we avert our gaze, but in film and in Zoom, it's direct.
Yeah, that's another reason for this mass intimacy, is that the director of a film has control over the eye contact or not between every member of a 600-seat theater and the screen. Whereas in theater, you don't. There's probably 10 people at any one moment that appear to be being seen by the people on stage. Everyone else is kind of looking at a profile. And this would be true if the heavens opened up and holographic film emerges. Holographic film would have the same problem as live theater, in that the director cannot now control the eye contact between the actors, whoever they are, and the audience.
Right. So I would say there's probably resonance with first-person voice in literature.
Yeah, very much.
In relation. Yeah.
Walter, you are extremely musical. Would you have ever been interested in directing opera?
No, I don't like opera. I turn it off when I.
We don't want to end on that note, so somebody come up with a with a good question to help us out here.
Well, relative to when I think it's probably coming in relation to the archaic, physical film. Somebody is wondering, how did you begin your journey in editing?
Long. long answer. I started editing sound when I was 10 because I was lucky enough to be able to play with the tape recorder of a friend whose father had it for business reasons. And like kids at that age, I discovered, oh, look, you could, how do kids know how to program a VCR? Not that anyone has to do that anymore, but I understood immediately, oh, you can cut this stuff and move it around and create montages of sound. And it was a step after a step after a step that got to editing film. I never, I mean, it was, to me, it was a teenage hobby, like building model airplanes. And, if I could whisper to myself, my 12-year-old self from the age of 78 and say, I'm still doing what you're doing now, that would be completely incredible to my 12-year-old self. But just one other thing about eye contact and holograms is that early Greek theater was what like we have for oratorios, in that the actors would come out masked and they would declaim their speeches, even though they were talking to the person next to them, they would be looking at the audience. And this person would answer, not looking, but looking. And some genius theater director, writer named Thespis woke up one morning at 3 o'clock in the morning and said, I've got a great idea. And he came in and said, listen, guys, what we're going to do with this is you're going to actually face each other when you talk to each other. Don't look at the audience. What? That's easy. No, believe me, it'll be great. It'll be great. And so that's the origin of thespian, is literally theater where the actors actually talk to each other as they do in real life, rather than how they did it formally, which is when they simply, axially talk to the audience.
For those of you who saw the earlier event in this series, when I was talking to Tristan Duke, the notion of holography comes back when you think of the Greek amphitheater, where the audience is completely in a 180-degree circular configuration, which is exactly like the panopticon that Tristan Duke was talking about a few days ago when he was talking about holographic panopticons. But anyway, so it all fits together.
Well, if we think of like the sort of introduction of scenery, I'm talking about early scenery in the Greek theater, where they're in principle creating a kind of double or mimetic of the world behind the stage. And it's fascinating because there's a very obvious reason why, which is they wanted to be able to control the story. They wanted to be able to make it, rain even if it was still sunny out, right? So you can see the kind of millennium-long encroachment of this mimesis relative to authorship eventually we get to here, we get to Zoom, we get to this in case
we get to Zoom.
Cut to Zoom, cut from Zoom.
Boy, wow. Well, thank you. Is there any last questions? It's an incredible, rare opportunity that we get to ask Ren Weschler.
Just something happened. Oh, there we are.
All right. Yeah. An interesting film to look at is the film Ida, came out in 2013 by Pavel Pawlikowski. And he and his cameraman, Lucas Zal, absolutely put people in close-up down along the bottom of the frame. And this was their response to their decision to shoot in black and white and to shoot in the old square format. And they thought, well, we can't just do what they did back then. Let's do something new. And so Lucas began, oh, this is interesting. And so the whole film is intentionally a violation of the golden ratio, stabbing the golden ratio in the solar plexus. But it's fascinating because it's deliberate, it's thought out. The films that you don't want to watch are the films where they're violating the golden ratio without knowing what they're doing. And then it just looks chaotic. It looks, amateurish because they don't know.
Walter, I think we made a date to come back and talk about pyramids before this whole session is over, if that's okay.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we'll be back in October or November with Walter talking about pyramids, maybe. And
Fantastic.
in the meantime, I wanted to remind people to come on Monday. You, David, can perhaps explain to people who have just happened here how they can find out about coming. And I promise you the conversation with Reveler will be quite fascinating.
Yeah. No, absolutely. First of all, thank you both so much. Really fantastic to
Sure,
have you.
my pleasure.
It's really great to bring this kind of depth to the architecture discourse. So yes, please come to our website, artslettersandnumbers.com. And if you're not signed up, sign up for our newsletter, because just about twice a week, 3 times a week, we're announcing more programs. Ren, as I said, is doing this incredible series, Mr. Weschler's Cabinet of Wonders, a whole series of conversations we're going to be running between now and November. And we also have, dozens of other programs, public events, concerts, all kinds of things happening, and a lot of studios and workshops are going on. We're running at least half a dozen, from drawing to calligraphy to writing to music.
And are you showing one, like, will this one be up on your website if other people want to see it?
Yeah, absolutely. All of the public events that we're holding, which there's a lot of them, are being recorded, and then they're going to be up on our website, which you can get the links to. Again, go to the website, and if you get the newsletter, we're announcing everything constantly. And also in the Venice Architectural Biennale website, the CityX virtual pavilion has all of this in it as well. So we are documenting everything. And we're soon going to announce, we've built that in fact will have the exhibitions, archives, and films of everything that we've been doing. We're going to probably release that in about a week, 10 days, because we've collected a fair amount already, in the last 6 weeks. So that will be out very soon. So please sign up for the newsletter. That's where you can get everything.
Thank you, David, for having us.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for
Bye-bye.
coming. See you soon.